Linda Carter had spent 30 years building a life with Richard. She had been his biggest supporter. The woman who stood by his side through every career move, every late night at the office, every high-stakes business deal. She had sacrificed her own ambitions, putting her dreams on hold to raise their children, to make their house a home, to ensure that Richard had everything he needed to succeed. And he had succeeded. Richard Carter was now the CEO of a major construction firm. A man respected in business circles, admired by his peers. He had power. He had wealth. He had everything. And yet, Linda had felt it for years, an invisible wall growing between them. An absence in his presence. She had ignored it, explained it away. He was busy, stressed, distracted. That's what she told herself every time he came home late. Every time he seemed more engaged with his phone than with her. Then, one evening, everything changed. Linda had planned a quiet dinner. She had made his favorite meal, set the table with the good china, even lit candles, a rare effort to reclaim something that had been slipping away for far too long. But when she called Richard to see if he was on his way, he barely answered. "Can't talk. Business dinner," he said, the words clipped. Final. Business dinner. She had heard that excuse before. Linda sat at the table alone, staring at the untouched meal. Her appetite gone. Something gnawed at her, a whisper in the back of her mind. She picked up her phone and opened the tracking app, the one Richard didn't know she still had access to. She had stopped checking it years ago, back when she still believed that trust was enough. But now, as she watched the small blinking dot on the screen, she felt her stomach tighten. He wasn't at the office. He wasn't at the usual upscale restaurant where he met with clients. He was at an intimate French bistro across town. Linda grabbed her coat and drove. She told herself she wouldn't assume the worst. Maybe he really was having a work dinner. Maybe she was being paranoid. But as she pulled up outside the restaurant and saw him through the large glass window, her heart stopped. Richard wasn't alone. He was sitting across from a woman, young, blonde, effortlessly beautiful. And he wasn't just talking to her. He was leaning in close, laughing in a way Linda hadn't seen in years. His hand reached across the table, brushing against hers. And then, the woman placed a hand on her stomach. Richard smiled. Linda felt the world shift beneath her feet. Linda sat frozen in her car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. She willed herself to breathe, to stay calm. But the scene unfolding inside the restaurant was impossible to ignore. Richard leaned in even closer, his expression warm, affectionate, an expression she hadn't seen directed at her in years. And then, the final blow. The young woman, Jessica, Linda would later learn, smiled and said something that made Richard reach for her hand. Linda didn't need to hear the words to understand. She had seen that gesture before, long ago, when she had told Richard she was pregnant with their first child. He was starting over, with someone else. A cold numbness spread through her as she sat there watching, her body rigid with the kind of stillness that only comes before a storm. For 30 years, she had been his partner, his anchor. She had supported him through the sleepless nights, through the uncertainty of building a company from nothing. She had raised their children, managed their home, given up her own ambitions, all so that he could become the man he was now. And this was her reward. Linda didn't remember driving home. She didn't remember walking through the front door of the house she had decorated, maintained, loved. All she knew was that she stood in the middle of their oversized kitchen, staring at the framed wedding photo on the counter. She picked it up, tracing the edges of the glass with her fingers. The two of them, young and full of dreams, smiling on their wedding day. It was a lie. The rage came slowly at first, creeping up her spine, settling in her chest. But when it hit, when the full weight of his betrayal sank in, it was all-consuming. She threw the picture across the room, watching as it shattered against the marble floor. She wanted to scream. She wanted to cry. She wanted to curl up in bed and pretend none of this was real. But she wouldn't. She had given Richard 3 decades of her life. She had been the perfect wife, the loyal partner. And he had repaid her by replacing her like she was nothing more than an old piece of furniture. No, he wouldn't get away with this. Linda wiped away the tears threatening to fall and steadied herself. If Richard thought he could walk away, if he thought he could discard her without consequence, then he was about to learn just how wrong he was. Because Linda Carter wasn't just going to survive this. She was going to take everything. Linda had never been the kind of woman who sought revenge. She had spent years believing in fairness, in loyalty, in the idea that love, true love, was built to last. But standing in the ruins of what used to be her marriage, staring at the shattered glass on the floor, she felt something shift inside her. This wasn't just about heartbreak. This was about justice. And if Richard thought he could walk away unscathed, he was about to learn how very wrong he was. She wasn't going to scream at him. She wasn't going to beg. She wasn't going to make the mistake of being another discarded wife drowning in sorrow. No, she was going to play this smart. The first thing she did was call Susan Reynolds, the best divorce attorney in the state. Susan was a longtime friend. A woman who had built her reputation on ensuring women like Linda didn't walk away from failed marriages empty-handed. When Linda explained the situation, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, Susan's voice, calm and razor-sharp. Richard Carter doesn't get to win this. Linda clenched her jaw. Tell me what to do. And so, the game began. The first step was information. Linda needed proof, not just of the affair, but of Richard's financial maneuvering. Men like him didn't just cheat, they prepared to cheat. They covered their tracks. They siphoned money into accounts their wives didn't know about. And Richard? He was predictable. With Susan's guidance, Linda began combing through their financial records. It didn't take long before she found exactly what she was looking for. A series of quiet withdrawals. Money being moved offshore. A condo in Jessica's name. Linda let out a humorless laugh as she stared at the screen. He was so confident, so sure he could erase her without consequence. Not this time. She gathered every document, every email, every bank statement. She was careful, methodical. She took screenshots, made copies, stored everything in a secure folder Susan had set up. Then came the next move. Linda needed a forensic accountant. Someone who could track every dollar Richard thought he had hidden. Susan recommended a man named Daniel Shaw, a former investigator who had spent years unraveling the financial lies of powerful men. He took one look at Richard's records and whistled. This guy's been playing dirty for a while, he said, shaking his head. But he's sloppy. Linda arched a brow. Sloppy enough to lose? Daniel smirked. With what you just gave me, he doesn't stand a chance. Linda sat back, fingers laced together. Good. Very good. She had spent 30 years being the woman behind the man. The one who stayed home. Who made sacrifices. Who played by the rules. But Richard had rewritten the rules the moment he decided to betray her. Now, she was just playing the game better than him. The next step was timing. Linda knew that if she made a move too soon, Richard would find a way to wriggle out of it. He was a man who had built an empire on negotiation, on loopholes, on twisting the truth until it suited him. So she let him think he was winning. She played the role of the blindsided, heartbroken wife perfectly. She didn't confront him. She didn't cry or rage or demand explanations. Instead, she waited, observed, let him grow comfortable in his deception. And when Richard finally sat her down one evening, his face wearing a carefully curated expression of guilt and regret, she knew the moment had arrived. Linda, he said, sighing as he reached across the table to take her hand. She resisted the urge to recoil. I don't want to hurt you. But, I think we both know things haven't been working between us for a while. She tilted her head, forcing her face into a mask of quiet devastation. What are you saying? Richard exhaled, his grip tightening. I think it would be best if we separated. We've grown apart. And, there's someone else. He said it with a careful softness, as if that would make it easier to stomach. Linda swallowed, blinking rapidly as if she were on the verge of tears. Someone else? She whispered. Richard nodded, squeezing her hand in what he probably thought was reassurance. Jessica, she and I, it just happened. Linda, but I want to do this the right way. I want us both to be okay. The audacity. The man sitting across from her. The man she had spent 3 decades supporting, loving, sacrificing for, was breaking their marriage like it was a business deal. Clean, efficient, And he thought he would walk away unscathed. Linda looked down, biting her lip as if she were barely holding herself together. "I just need some time," she murmured. Richard, ever the magnanimous betrayer, nodded. "Of course. Take all the time you need." She forced a weak smile, then stood and excused herself, retreating to the bedroom. As soon as the door shut behind her, her expression changed. No more pretending. She pulled out her phone. Dialing Susan. "It's time," she said. Susan didn't ask for details. She only said, "I'll see you in the morning." And just like that, Richard Carter's world was about to collapse. 2 months later, Richard Carter sat in a courtroom, his perfectly curated life unraveling before his eyes. He had walked into the divorce proceedings with his usual arrogance, assuming that his money, his influence, and his carefully constructed image would protect him. He had expected a clean break, a settlement that favored him, allowing him to move on with Jessica and their new life without much damage. But Richard had underestimated the woman he had betrayed. Linda sat across from him, poised, unshaken, her head held high. She was no longer the woman he thought he could discard. She was prepared, ruthless, unstoppable. As Susan laid out the case, piece by piece, Richard's confidence crumbled. The forensic accountant's report revealed offshore accounts, hidden funds, and fraudulent business expenses, all used to finance his affair. The evidence of corporate misconduct painted him not just as a cheating husband but as an unethical CEO, someone who had used company resources to fund his double life. The witness testimony included statements from business associates, employees, and even a former assistant who confirmed Richard's attempts to move assets before filing for divorce. The judge saw through his lies in an instant. By the end of the proceedings, Linda walked away with 70% of their shared assets, including their primary home, a significant stake in his company, and enough financial security to ensure she would never have to depend on another man again. Richard, meanwhile, was left humiliated, forced to sell company shares to cover the settlement, effectively losing control over the empire he had built. And Jessica? She had left him weeks before the trial ended, unwilling to tie herself to a man who no longer had the wealth and power that had once made him so desirable. Richard Carter had lost everything. The day the divorce was finalized, Linda stood in front of their former house, the house she now owned outright, and took a deep breath. She didn't feel grief. She didn't feel anger. She felt free. For the first time in decades, she wasn't living in someone else's shadow. She wasn't sacrificing her happiness, her time, her dreams for a man who had never truly valued her. So she did what she should have done years ago. She sold the house, donated part of the proceeds to a women's foundation, and bought a stunning oceanfront condo just for herself. She traveled. She started a new business, something she had always wanted to do but never had the chance. She reconnected with friends, joined a community of women who had walked similar paths, and found joy in rediscovering who she was beyond being Richard Carter's wife. And on the rare occasion that Richard tried to contact her, whether it was a desperate attempt to reconcile or a bitter attempt to lash out, she simply smiled. She had won, not because she took his money, not because she had destroyed his life the way he had tried to destroy hers. She had won because she had built a new one, on her own terms, without him. This story isn't just about revenge, it's about self-worth, resilience, and reclaiming power. Too often, women sacrifice everything for a relationship, only to be cast aside when they are no longer convenient. But Linda's journey proves that betrayal isn't the end, it can be the beginning of something greater. She didn't just take back what was hers, she built a new life on her own terms. What do you think? Did Linda's story inspire you? Comment 2 if you loved it, or 7 if it wasn't your favorite, and if you believe in the strength of women who rise after being knocked down. Hit the like button and subscribe for more powerful stories like this. Your support helps keep these stories alive. Let's talk in the comments.